So this week is Parshas Dvarim, but we are going to talk about Tisha B'av in a specific way. Just before we get going, I want to say this is the last year before the summer holidays. So looking forward to picking up again, Mitzvah Shem in Elul, date to be confirmed. See you on the other side. So, by way of introduction, I want to clarify something that's really important for us, I think for everybody to understand about Tisha B'av, but the 9 days also more broadly. We're very fortunate today to have a Yiddishkeit that has been developed, structured, and that has evolved all the way since Har Sinai. If you imagine all the hoops Yiddishkeit has gone through in terms of Tisha B'av, the Rabbanons, Rishonim, Achronim, Shulchan Aruch, Poskim, Minhagim, all the way up through the centuries until we have what we have today, a wholesome framework of Yiddishkeit. And therefore we're lucky. Hundreds of years ago they didn't have the level of clarity that we have in Sforim today that dictates to us all the time how to behave, what the Torah expects from us. If a person lives according to this halachic framework of life, which means they seek to do Torah and mitzvahs, they seek to follow the Shulchan Aruch, a person has to realize that they're doing Ratzon Hashem, they're doing something that's wonderful and that's great. If a person is able to do Torah and mitzvahs in a way that they are actually engaged emotionally, that it's something of an experience for them, that they are close to Hashem as well, then that's even greater. And so on and so on. There's many madrigas to that. But every person has to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu at their level, according to where they are at. And make no mistake about it, serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu by keeping Shulchan Aruch is a gewaldige Zach. It's a wonderful place to be at. Why am I saying this? People sometimes are bothered when they think about Tisha B'av, even the 9 days and the discomforts that come with the halachas of the 9 days. And sometimes people enter into the zone of beating themselves up because, look, I don't really feel for the Churban. I don't really feel the avelos that I'm supposed to feel. What's the point anyway? If somebody keeps the halachas of the 3 weeks, if somebody keeps the halachas of the 9 days, if someone comes to shul on Tisha B'av, fasts as best as they can, they listen to Eicha, they read the Kinnas as best as they can, they make a sincere effort to try and understand what they're saying and engage with Tisha B'av at heart, what's going on, they're doing well, they're doing good. That Yiddishkeit is supremely valuable. No one should say, I don't feel it anyway, so what's the point? I think that's a big mistake. It'll be wonderful if you have moments when you feel moments of connection, that's great, and that's what we're all about. We're going to try with our share to give us some perspective on that. But in no way should that be a standard by which one has to judge themselves. If my Yiddishkeit is top-notch with feeling and engagement and I'm crying my way through Eicha, then I must be doing something right. But anything less than that, I'm doing something wrong. Don't beat yourself up. It's good. There's always more madrigas to follow. There's always better places to get to. But no one should undermine the simple framework of halacha that we have to keep, and keep it meaningfully with a good heart, persons in a very good place. Some people connect more naturally to the mourning of the Beis Hamikdash. Some people connect less. For some people it's harder. For some people it's not as hard. Everyone's different. It's fine. Do what you have to do. Try and do it mindfully. Try and do it with the right sense of direction, the way you want to, of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem's happy with that. Okay, that's just by way of introduction. The main topic today is I want to pose a question. I want to pose a question that goes to the heart of what Tisha B'av is really about, and how we can come away from Tisha B'av uplifted and inspired. So look, Tisha B'av is the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. Make no mistake, I don't think anyone's going to doubt that. The saddest day of the calendar is Tisha B'av. Mourning the loss of Beis Hamikdash. We're sitting on the floor like Avelim. And we're not just mourning the loss of Beis Hamikdash, but all of the tzoros that happened at the time of the Churban and since, throughout the Golius, on the one hand. And yet, there is a seeming contradiction. Because in Eicha Aleph Tezvav, the pasuk says, Kora Alai Moed. Tisha B'av is called in the pasuk a Yom Tov, a Moed. Now the Shlah says, yeah, it's called a Moed because of the day it's going to become. When Mashiach comes, the day of Tisha B'av will reverse from being a day of sadness to a day of great joy and a Moed. That's fine. But it's not just Al Shem HaOsid, it's not just for the future. The Gemara in Pesachim Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph darshans from this pasuk a drasha that tells us Rish Chodesh is a Yom Tov. In other words, there is something in this pasuk which is alive now and not just about the future. What's more, Shulchan Aruch Paskins Tovkaf Nun Tes Dalad. We do not say Tachnun on Tisha B'av, Mishum da Mikri Moed. Tisha B'av, the saddest day of the year, is a Yom Tov. And because it's a Yom Tov, that's why, out of joy, we don't say Tachnun. And in case you weren't sure whether Shulchan Aruch is based on, Mr. Brewer quotes this very pasuk, Kora Alai Moed. The Tisha B'av is called a Moed, Tisha B'av is called a Yom Tov. It's the very same day that we're concentrating on the sadness and the loss and the pain and the destruction that came about through the Churban and beyond. We do fasting, we do kinnis, we read Eicha. That same day is a Yom Tov. How do we square this? That's the central question I want to try and get perspective on, because I think that the answer gives us a great insight into the real crux of what Tisha B'av is about and how we can maximize our gain from it. And just to add to the question as well, the Ramah brings from the Gos Maimoni that there's a minhag to say Nechama after Kinnis. You finish Kinnis and then Nergim to say a bit of Nechama. And again the question is, what's changed? It's the same day, Tisha B'av. Mashiach unfortunately hasn't yet come. Beis Medrash is still destroyed. We're still on Tisha B'av. We're still mourning the loss. Now it's the appropriate time to give Nechama, to give words of comfort. How do we square it? Okay, so let's build something which I think will be very insightful. Megillas Eicha. Megillas Eicha was written by Yirmiyah Hanavi, before who was around by Churban Bayis Rishon. And the psukim of Eicha is actually the Nevios of Yirmiyah in advance of the Churban. Although it's written in a way that he's bemoaning, as if it's already happened, but he's bemoaning what's going to happen if Klal Yisrael didn't do tshuva in that time. You know, I think the saddest word of Eicha almost is the very first word of the Megillah. Eicha. Eicha Yoshua Balav. Eicha means, how can it be? And this is Yirmiyah Hanavi, one of the greatest Nevi'im to have ever lived, who was going around encouraging Klal Yisrael, telling them, do teshuvah, I'm telling you now, it's going to get bad. And they're just not listening. They're not paying any attention to him. They do far worse to him. They're rejecting him out of hand. And this is Yirmiyah now, in his great sadness, realizing the terrible catastrophe that's going to befall Klal Yisrael as a result of this. And he's saying, Eicha, how can it be? And we use this word Eicha in Kinnis as well. It's almost a wonderment from a place of sadness. The Gemara in Moed Katan Chavav tells us of a conversation that took place with Yoyakim, who was the king at the time. And they came to Yoyakim and they said to him, Yirmiyah's written Megillas Eicha. And listen to this interesting conversation. Kotsav Yirmiyah Sefer Kinos, they tell Yoyakim. And he says, what does it say in this Eicha? What does it say? And they respond, Eicha Yoshva Bodod, with the pasuk, the first pasuk. And he gives a very strange and cryptic answer. He says, Amalahu, Ano Malka, I'm the king. They come again. They said to him, it also says, Bochoi Sivka Balaylo. And he responds with the same, Ano Malka, I'm the king. They bring another pasuk, Golsu Yudumiyoni. And he says, Ano Malka. And finally, Darchei Tzion Avelos. And he says, Ano Malka. Each of the psukim they're bringing, quoting the Eicha, he gives this cryptic response, Ano Malka. Then they pose him the pasuk, Hoyut Soreho L'Rosh, which means the enemies become the head. Which essentially implies that his position's at stake because he was the head, he's the king. To that he says, Man Amra, who said that? Who's saying that the enemies are going to get to the position of leadership and basically replace me? And they respond, Ki Hashem Ha'igah, basically Hashem. In that moment, Yoakim gets into a rage. Kodar Kolas Koris Sheba, unfortunately he takes out all the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu from the Megillah, the Sorafon Ba'esh, and he burns it in a fire. Of course, this Gemara demonstrates what we were saying, that Klal Yisrael completely and totally ignored Yirmiyah's dire warnings on the lead up to the Churban. And this is an example of that. But what does it mean that he first replied with Anomalka, and why was he so bothered, particularly when it came to the Pasuk of Hoyut Tzareh L'Rosh? So Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz in Yaris Devash explains beautifully this Gemara. Years and says that Klal Yisrael made a huge mistake in their calculations of working out what to do. Yirmiyah is telling them on the one hand, you better do Churban and change because Hashem's going to destroy the Beis HaMikdash. You know what mistake they made? They said to themselves, Avinu av harachamon, Keil racham v'chanon, the Rebbeinu Shel Olam is the merciful one. He's not going to destroy the Beis HaMikdash. Yeah, there's warnings. Yeah. It'll be fine. They mistakenly took HaKadosh Baruch Hu's tremendous mercy of Klal Yisrael as a reason not to take seriously Yirmiyah's warnings. When Yoakim replied to the Psukim, Ano Malka, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz says, what he means is, I'm king, it's fine. Give me your negative prophecies. It'll be alright. Why? Because Hashem's a merciful one. Hashem's going to have mercy on us. But Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz says one more stage with this. There's a rule when it comes to Gezeirus from Shamayim, that when it comes to something good, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides something good, HaKadosh Baruch Hu never reverses that. But if HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides something that appears to us as a negative, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will reverse. That is the rule when it comes to Gezeirus Shamayim. All of this talk about Churban, Yoakim heard, Klal Yisrael heard, says Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, this prophecy as a terrible tragedy, as a bad thing that's going to be happening. So they figured to themselves, oh, you know what? HaKadosh Baruch Hu will reverse things that are bad. He's open to that. So Hashem will definitely reverse this one. When Yoakim heard the Pasuk Hoyut Tzareh L'Rosh, says Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, what he heard in that moment was that when Klal Yisrael go down, the enemies are going to go up, like a seesaw. And he understood in that moment, hang on, this must be L'Tovas Klal Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is setting Klal Yisrael up for a direct consequence, that when they go down, the enemies are going to go up. In that, he was suddenly struck by, wow, then it must be that all this talk of Churban is actually for the good of Klal Yisrael. And in that moment, says Yonasan Eibeshitz, he realized, if it's for the good of Klal Yisrael, then this Gezerah can't be reversed. And out of desperation and sheer rage, he destroyed Eicha at that point. In other words, he recognized that he couldn't anymore be so blasé about the warnings of Yirmiyah. Because this is a Gezerah of Churban which is based on HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Hatova. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanting to be good to Klal Yisrael. At the same time, he didn't really have what it took, the humility that it took, to recognize that and to say, you know what, let's do tshuva. We see from this Gemara a really, really interesting take on the Churban. Aside from the unfortunate rejection of Yirmiyah Hanavi, which is just so sad, but what the Gemara is telling us is that it's true. Churban was a tragedy. The destruction, the loss of life, the loss of Ashras Hashchina in our midst. Very sad. And yet it was for our good. It was of benefit to Klal Yisrael. It fitted within the category of a Gzeira min Hashamayim that was for good. The Gemara in Kiddushin Lamed Aleph from Abay says, Dorash Avivi Mizmor LeDavid. The Gemara ponders over the Pasuk, beginning of the Mizmor, the capital of the Tehillim that talks about Bo Goyim Benachal Osecha, Timu Es Heichal Kochecha, the Pasuk in Tehillim that describes the Churban. And the Gemara ponders over the fact that the Mizmor begins with the word Mizmor. Says Rashi from Chazal, Mizmor? Mizmor means a song. You're singing songs when there's Churban. It should be kino. It should be a lamentation. Says Rashi from Chazal, it's a famous medrash. Kilo HaKadosh Baruch Hu chamosoi be'etzim va'avonim shebebeisoi. HaKadosh Baruch Hu vented his wrath over physical building that was the Beis HaMikdash, so that he wouldn't need to take it out on Klal Yisrael. Because had HaKadosh Baruch Hu chosen to take it out on Klal Yisrael instead, Lo nishtaya mimenu miYisrael, there wouldn't be anybody left in Klal Yisrael. In other words, for all the terrible tragedy around Churban Abayis, it was a chesed from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that Hashem destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. It was for Klal Yisrael's good that HaKadosh Baruch Hu took it out, as it were, b'churban, and not on destroying the nation of Klal Yisrael. Now this insight, in my view, radically changes our approach to Avelus of the Churban. Because essentially there's sadness and there's sadness. People can be sad. It's natural to feel sad when there's a loss, when there's pain. And a person can feel sad with a sense of feeling forlorn, of feeling so lost that they don't even have any hope in their life. They are led to places of depression, of yush, leading a person to sort of give up from the sadness. But then there's another type of sadness. There's a sadness when one feels a sense of loss, but he feels it with a certain fondness for what is lost. A sense of connection to what was lost, which brings him to yearning for what was. And when you're yearning for something, that brings a person hope. We sit on the floor and we spend the first half of Tisha B'av in sadness. Of course it's right that we look at it face value, the loss of life, the terrible, terrible Taurus that Klal Yisrael have gone through for so long in his Golos. Of course it's right that we take the time to talk, to think, to reflect, and to realize and to feel the pain of the loss, and to realize it's because of Klal Yisrael's Averis and we should do tshuva and we should be moved to change, etc. Of course that's all true. On the very same day, at the very same time though, don't forget, it's a Yom Tov. It's a Yom Tov, we're not going to say Tachnun. Because it's a day of yearning for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The type of sadness that's being asked of us is not a sadness of all is lost, oy vey, everything's gone, dial down, all over. That's not a sadness. Of course, there's a recognition, a mature recognition that things are not the same, and we wish for the return of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashivenu, Hashem Elecha, we end off Eicha with. Because that's the tachlis. Recognize what was with a yearning for what will be again soon. If a person is engaged in that, it connects him to HaKadosh Baruch Hu even more. That yearning connects him to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's a Yom Tov. And that's also a day where nechama, words of comfort, is appropriate. You have a friend who's going through a rough time, or a friend, Rahman al who has a loss. So you can give them nechama. What do you do to give a person nechama? What do you do to comfort a person? First and foremost, you're there for them. You're present with them. And if appropriate, you're able to remind them. If appropriate, you're able to say to them things, it's going to be okay, it's good, it's alright. Hang in there. Well, that's what the Rebbeinu Shalom tells us. In Mourning b'Torah, when we're in pain, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with us. Immediately following Tisha B'av, we begin the Shiva D'Nechemta, the 7 Haftarahs that will lead us all the way to your Rosh Hashanah. Nachamu, Nachamu Ami. The Rebbeinu Shalom is comforting us himself. When we mourn, we're sad. But then immediately following the sadness, we can switch gear into recognizing and connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and feeling the nechama from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because yes, it hurts, but it's good. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is good, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does good, and it's good, ultimately good. So it might hurt, and it's appropriate for us to recognize the pain, but not to lose ourselves in it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is still with us. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, Kuf Daled Amud Aleph, tells us on the Pasuk, in Eicha, Hoysa Ka'almona, describing Klal Yisrael as a widow because of the Churban. It says the Gemara over the Marav, Ke'almona, v'lo almona mamish. Yes, like a widow, but not quite. Rather, it's like a woman whose husband has left her. The Medina Sayam in those days, going abroad was a very, very long endeavor. But the da'atoi lachzoir eileho. The husband's intention is to return and to come back to her. So yes, she misses him. Yes, he's far away. And in those days as well, no contact. Probably no idea when he would return. But she knows he's returning. This is the state that Klal Yisrael is in, says the Pasuk in Eicha, and the Gemara expounds. Kadosh Baruch Hu has removed himself from our life to a point. But he's coming back. And we yearn for his return. That's why, with all the destruction and with all the sadness, there's still a song on Tisha B'av, Mizmor La'asaf. And that song is a song of hope. We don't know when, we don't know how long, but we know HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there, we know HaKadosh Baruch Hu is coming back. And you know why we're able to sing that song? You know why we're able to know that? Because we know that even the Churban was good. Even the Churban was by HaKadosh Baruch Hu because of the goodness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to us. And the truth is, it's not just Tisha B'av. This idea of yearning for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Gemara Sanhedrin tells us, Gemara is talking about Mashiach coming. And the Gemara wonders basically why hasn't Mashiach arrived yet. And the Gemara concludes in this part, Midas Hadin Ma'akeres. It's a Midas Hadin that stops Mashiach from coming. So the Gemara asks, well, if Midas Hadin is stopping Mashiach coming, Lama Anu Lama Mechakin, why are we waiting for Mashiach? Why are we bothering if there's a reason why Mashiach isn't coming? Because Midas Hadin has decided we're not going to be Zeicha. You know what the Gemara answers? You know why we're waiting for Mashiach? You know why it's right for us to wait for Mashiach? The Kabel Scha, to receive reward. Now, when the Gemara, when Chazal talk about reward, they don't mean a nice sweet, a little shkoyach for your effort, here's a chocolate. That's not what reward is. Reward means gain. So we're waiting for Mashiach, even though we are assured that he's not coming, because Midas Hadin stops him coming, because we are going to gain from that. What are we gaining? What does it mean to wait for Mashiach? You're yearning for the Shekhinah. Yearning for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to return. Hashivenu Hashem Elecha v'noshuva. Remembering the loss, remembering the lack of Asheras HaShekhinah, remembering what was, turns us towards the future of what will be and what should be, and we yearn for it and we want it. That's what it means to wait for Mashiach. And that's what a person gains from. Because if you yearn for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you bring HaKadosh Baruch Hu into your life. And the Chavetz Chaim says, in Tzipizul Yeshua, Chavetz Chaim says this Gemara, Hashem does not hurry the end of Golus because He wants this from us. He loves the idea that we're yearning for Him so much. He delays the Geula so that we'll yearn for Him more. Let's recap. I'm going to leave you with a final thought. We asked the Kasha, how could Tisha B'av, on the one hand, be a day of sadness, and on the other hand be a Yom Tov? How do we square that? And the second question we asked in that was, why is Tisha B'av itself a day when it's appropriate to have nechama, comfort, when we're still sad about the Beis HaMikdash? And we explained that although on the face of it, of course, the Churban was a tragedy, ultimately it was a chesed Hashem, that Hashem vented His wrath on Eitzim va'avonim and not on Klal Yisrael. So, on the one hand, yes, we mourn, but we mourn with perspective. We mourn that leads us to yearning. We mourn, in a sense, with hope for a return to those times again. Because even though it hurts, we know it's good. And that's what Nechama means. Nechama means recognizing HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with us even when it's difficult. And recognizing that it's going to be okay. It is okay. It's going to be okay. Hashem's going to return once again soon. And here's the final thought I'm going to leave you with. The menfolk will all be familiar with the Gemara at the end of Makkos. I'm not going to go through the whole Gemara. We don't have time. But in short, Rabbi Akiva was walking with his friends in Yerushalayim. And two instances happened where they cried and he laughed. They saw something that reminded them of the Churban, and it really struck to their heart. And they started crying. And he was laughing. And they said to him, Rabbi Akiva, why are you laughing? And he said to them, oh, why are you crying? And they said, they're crying? What do you mean? Terrible Churban, look. Quoting Psukim, look what's going on. And he said, that's why I'm laughing. It's very strange. Rabbi Akiva's laughing. What, you think Rabbi Akiva's disrespectful about Churban Abayis? So, again, the Marsha is a big piece. We're not going to go through the Marsha, but one yesod that comes out of the Marsha is as follows. Rabbi Akiva recognized the type of crying that they were engaged in. And he recognized that their expression and the type of crying they were engaged in was one of despair. It was almost like, oh, look how terrible, oh, things are. There's even a shul going on the Makom HaMikdash. Rabbi Akiva wasn't disrespectful of Churban. Says the Marsha, Rabbi Akiva also tore his clothes when they came near that Makom HaMikdash. Of course, Rabbi Akiva knew what Churban Abayis meant. But Rabbi Akiva wanted them to balance their sadness with perspective. In as much as prophecy, he tells them, about the Churban was fulfilled, and you're sad about that, you realize there's other prophecy that's yet to be fulfilled, so if one is fulfilled, surely the other one's going to be fulfilled. In other words, have some hope. Not all is lost. On the one hand, yes, tear your clothes, yes, be sad, up to a point. But don't lose yourself. And that's what Nechama does on Tisha B'av. It rebalances us. We engage in the sadness, but we do so with a enveloped in hope for a better future. And indeed, that's how they turned round to him at the end of the Gemara and they said, Akiva nichamtonu, you have comforted us. Because that's what comfort means. It's rebalancing the sadness with hope and realizing not all is lost. When we be zeicha to be mis'abel Yerushalayim enough that HaKadosh Baruch Hu decides this Tisha B'av to make it a full-on Yom Tov. Shkarach.